So hi and welcome to today's video. So today I'm going to be showing you a full interior clean process. Now this car was definitely a bit of a challenge and I'm going to show you a few shots here of what it looked like beforehand. Effectively this car has not had a proper clean inside for I don't even know how long, to be honest, probably since it was bought. It was in a horrendous state. It's been taken on various holidays, fishing trips and things like that, so it's just looking pretty terrible. Now I had the challenge of cleaning this up in a few hours with very basic equipment because I don't generally clean interiors that much. I only really clean my own, and for that I just need a couple of microfiber towels. I don't need wet vacs and things like that. Whereas with this, it definitely was in need of some specialist equipment, but I just didn't have it. So essentially the challenge was to get this looking as good as possible in a reasonably short space of time, but also with limited equipment, and hopefully you'll appreciate the transformation at the end. So I got my nitrile gloves on, and first step was to just clear out as much of the rubbish as possible, and there was a lot of rubbish in there. It took a little bit of time actually to get everything out, but of course this is the first step you've got to do before moving on to the hoovering and all that kind of thing. So the centre console was a particular highlight for me. Particular highlights from the centre console were an old Nokia that the owner hadn't seen in several years. What you could tell after I actually removed all the rubbish was just how bad the carpets were actually around where the mats had been. So the first step, of course, was to get a hoover on all of this. So I didn't have a particularly amazing hoover, and I would have liked one that had sort of a tube and attachments and things like that. Essentially I just had these handheld ones that of course are basically just household hoovers that you can detach. So I did have a couple of them, which was quite lucky because they all had slightly different attachments, which meant I was able to cope with the demands of not having much battery life to them and also trying to get into these sort of more intricate areas. And I managed to do a reasonable job here. I think hoovering in total took at least half an hour on this car. I wanted to take as much time as possible. It's a pretty tedious process, but it does make the biggest difference, and it does generally make the rest of the cleaning process a lot easier as well. Now this particular owner was actually told a few years ago, after a different car was valeted by the valeter who had spent about 6 hours on the vehicle. This is now the point where the car needs valeting. So the next step was to go in and actually clean the vehicle. So for this I used Green Star all-purpose cleaner, and I diluted that in a spray bottle down just to 2%. Now I found that this concentration works really well because it was able to clean effectively and also quite economically, but also didn't leave any sort of residue behind, which I really didn't want to have to deal with. So essentially I used a combination of microfiber towels and also some different brushes to try and get into some of the areas and get some of that ingrained dirt out from some of the plastics that had a sort of texture to them. And I was able to do a pretty good job, I think, of sort of scrubbing up the plastics reasonably well. There was quite a lot of dirt, particularly on the lower section, so I started around here mainly just to kind of get the bulk of that away, and then moved on to sort of the dashboard and things like that. So the gear stick was also in a pretty bad way. There was a lot of kind of stuck on dirt, and I think from sort of looking at it, I think it was chewing gum that had sort of been stuck on there, so that obviously took a little bit of agitation. I would have liked to have probably used a leather cleaner on this bit, but I just wanted to jump in with the all-purpose cleaner to give it as much chance to kind of really scrub that dirt away. The doors themselves weren't horrendous. There was a lot of dirt around, particularly the handles, in the controls as well, but also in the door cards, so not horrendous, but definitely in need of a good kind of clean, a good wipe down, and generally I could get away with a microfiber towel for most of these areas. So the glove box was also pretty mucky, as the passengers probably hadn't been too considerate on this vehicle. I'm not too surprised considering the state of it, but yeah, definitely been a few footprints on there. So just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying the video so far, it would be brilliant if you could give it a like. It really does help to get the video out to more people and helps me to know what kind of content you guys like as well. So I also used a brush on some of the more intricate areas, particularly around the vents, just to kind of scrub away as much dirt as possible because the vents really do collect a lot of this dust particularly, and if you don't kind of clean those areas, I always feel like the car looks a little bit unfinished afterwards. So I wanted to pay a little bit of attention to the pedals, as I'm pretty sure that they never have actually been cleaned. So I went in with the all-purpose cleaner. You can tell that I'm using this for a lot of areas on the car, and essentially gave them a scrub using a toothbrush, which I found worked pretty well here. Then I moved on to the seats. Now I did soak them pretty much in that all-purpose cleaner. It was quite a warm day, so they did have plenty of time to dry, so it wasn't too much of a problem. Now of course in this situation, using some more specialist equipment would have been a lot better here. Essentially I had a spray and some brushes. I also used this sort of fabric cleaner that is just a household one that I had under the sink, just to see if I could get any of the more stained areas looking a little bit nicer. I had some success with it, but it definitely wasn't a miracle product, and I would have liked to have got the seats a little bit cleaner than this. They look better and they smelt nice, so generally not too bad, but I think that they definitely could have come up a lot better if I'd have had some more specialist equipment. Same with the carpets as well, although they generally came up a little bit nicer than the seats, I would have said. But for me, it doesn't really make sense to invest in more specialist equipment for the interior because my car never gets like this, so I'd only be using it on other people's, and this is actually the first interior all year that I've cleaned of someone else's. So I'd rather invest elsewhere in the kind of equipment that I buy. So then I also wanted to give the car just a quick hoover to remove any of the loose dirt that had been lifted, and then moved on to the steering wheel. So this is where the car started to look a little bit better, but you could see that the steering wheel was super shiny here. I don't think it had ever actually been cleaned, to be honest. So it was in a pretty bad way. So I used a leather repair company leather cleaner on this and just gave it a little bit of a brush. I wanted to use a fairly gentle brush here because the wheel wasn't in amazing condition and I didn't really want to cause any issues in terms of causing the leather to flake or any potential damage caused by agitation, and I found that this got the leather to come up pretty nicely. Then I moved on to the rubber mats. So probably the only saving grace of this car was it had rubber mats instead of carpet mats, which made it a lot easier to actually clean. So I gave those a good jet wash down to remove any kind of loose dirt. Then I used the all-purpose cleaner again and gave it a good scrub. Now the brush I'm using here I actually intended to be using on wheel arches, and that's what I purchased it for. But I didn't realise quite how large it was when I purchased it, so it doesn't really fit in that many wheel arches. It sort of fits in half of my rear wheel arches, so I decided to use it here, and I've used it for a couple of odd things over the past few months as well, and it did a pretty good job. It's reasonably gentle but also gets a good foam going and some good agitation to make sure that the mats were pretty clean by the end of it. Then, while the mats were drying, I wanted to just go over the interior again, but just some of the areas where you might be touching quite often, so on the doors and on the dashboard, anywhere that was plastic that you'd be touching, but not the leather surfaces. So I used an antimicrobial cleaner by GB Detailing to do this, just to make sure that not only did they look clean, but they were actually clean and there wasn't any kind of grime left on there. I also used Auto Finesse spritz on the interior plastics as well, and that was just to kind of give them a more refreshed look. Now this is a product that's kind of an interior detailer, and it's sort of used to make the plastics look a little bit darker and just overall kind of refresh the look of the interior, which I think it definitely did here, as definitely a lot of the plastics were quite faded and dull, so I think it made a big difference. I then moved on to the glass as a final step, and I used Bouncer's Look Sharp. Now, this is a pretty potent glass cleaner and you can actually dilute this, but I was being reasonably lazy, and also the glass again hadn't been cleaned in I don't know how long. So I used this with a microfiber waffle weave towel. So here is the finished look. Now, it's by no means perfect at all, but I think considering the time that I had, you can see some before and afters, I think that there was a good transformation, and particularly because the equipment was quite limited. So of course it would be brilliant if you could give this video a like if you have enjoyed it. Again, it does really help to support the channel. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And if you've made it this far through the video and you're not subscribed already, it'd be great if you could consider doing that too. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.